So this is the second part of my video about choking my 7800 X3D with terrible GPU. It's not that I wanted also to test the two computer units that you have with the onboard graphic of the 78 X3D.
But no, for the next part, I'll timestamp it because I'm going to talk for 3 or 4 minutes about trying to make sense of AMD name scheme and graphic count unit. So if you just want the rest of the story, you can just skip it. Okay, let's talk about the current situation. Before the pandemic, I think the general knowledge was like that onboard graphics sucks and you should just avoid them. And that's it. If we switch to the 7000 series, you can see that most of them have it except the 7500F and 7400F. And it's also still the two graphic core unit. And here, if you switch to the AI 300 series, you can see that you have configurations starting at 2 going to 16 graphic core count. And if you switch to the Max series, you go for 32 or 40 graphic core count, which I really want to see a small form factor with like 40 graphic count. Now, if you switch to the 7000 series, you can see that for laptops, you have like 12 or 2 or 12 or 2. Are you confused yet? We're not done. Almost, though. I promise there's a point there. Now we see some with 4, some with 12 for the 8000 series. And finally, I'll stop with the 6000. By this point, I expect no one is watching the video anyway, so I can just be ranting. And you see here that like for the compute unit with the 680M, you have 12 graphic core. And the cheaper version, which I think was the ROG Ally on X, has 6. If you're confused right now, congratulations, you are a human being. I don't know why exactly like Intel, AMD, and Dell decided all the same year to change their processor and laptops name. It made everything super confusing for the. Well, let's take an example that's going to be easier for everyone. My ROG Ally Z1 Extreme has 12 compute unit for the graphic core. Now, the difference between the 680M and the 780M when they moved to the 7000 series was apparently just a rebrand plus some AIs on top of it. And then for the next generation, you had the AMD Radeon 780M, which, like I said, is basically the same graphic core APU that the ROG Ally. And this is why, like, a lot of tech channel were like, well, yeah, it's fine if you want a GPD with that console and you want a different form factor, but do not upgrade for like just for upgrading because it's the same GPU, so it's stagnant. This is why a lot of reviewers were like, do not upgrade, let's say from a ARG Ally to a 780M laptop. It's basically the same GPU, and they said, oh, we add AI now. But for a gaming NL console, that's not exactly a very useful feature. But this is why when we finally switched to the 8900M, that had like 16 core, and every generation is supposed to bring efficiency gain, the reviewers and the press was excited because finally we had something that would be better. But this is why at Computex the press got super excited because now with the Max you had 40 graphic unit or 32 with like the 390 and 385. So, but this is why you saw like tablets and laptop that were super expensive, but would theoretically like have 3 or 4 times the rendering power of the original ROG Ally Z1 Extreme if it would scale linearly, which is really not the case because the CPU can be more efficient. And this is why we see the new generation of NLPC that have like battery life of 2 or 3 hours, even if they're playing Cyberpunk or more. But my a good example is my 5600X, great processor, but now that I upgrade the machine, I need a graphic card because I don't have any like 2 cores graphic count unit. So I'm actually good that happy that AMD is basically like, Yeah, we're gonna give them to you. So why is it that useful? Is that if you think that you kill your GPU, or you have a defective GPU, if you don't have a friend that can let you land your GPU, or you don't necessarily want to do the gonna buy a GPU, try it in my PC, and then like return it to store kind of loophole, you kind of stuck. And with the price of GPU shooting up so much, like if you have someone that just I don't know playing like Minesweeper and just need to browse the web but need a tower, that does sound like someone you could put a Mac Mini or like any computer or old laptop would work. But if for some reason they need a desktop tower, they don't really need a GPU. But like even cheap GPU now are like 2, 3, 400 for old usage GPU. I would go the use way for sure. And I know they'd use product differentiation, saying, well, you can save $30 if you buy the processor without the graphic card unit. And in theory, this is good because you're like, except, well, you had advantage like quick sync and things like that. But you're like, well, I'm going to put a discrete GPU always, so I don't need it. So you just skip it. And then you stuck with your CPU and you're like, well, I do wish that I had at least something basic because then I can do like a server with it or something else that you do. By for a server, you could put a graphic card the first time, do the Windows setup, and remove it. But it's still kind of annoying if you want to debug it locally. So I decided, oh, that's gonna be fun. Let's try the two CU unit. But because I went through two motherboard, just because of my mortal enemy, the PCIe Express 16 lane retention bracket and release mechanism, I was like, oh, I don't want to take my GPU out again because now I'm becoming paranoid every time I do it.
So this is the second part of my video about choking my 7800 X3D with terrible GPU. It's not that I wanted also to test the two computer units that you have with the onboard graphic of the 78 X3D, but it became like something a little bigger. And lately, I'm getting more and more fed up with Windows, and I'll basically like it's doing whatever it wants versus like my OS just waiting for me to do something.
Also, I don't know what is the big deal about like, do not buy all the tech viewers are like, do not buy a 8 gig GPU like in 2025. It takes 2 minutes, it takes 2 seconds for Asus or like MSI to apply those settings. So you can just switch it on the fly when you buy a graphic card.
Okay, activate iGPU, and then put like 8 or 16 for how much, or automatic for the VRAM. After he do so, I was like, oh, let's try to put it at 16 right away from the gate and see what it does. Save, reboot. Then I'm like, reboot in safe mode. DD to remove all the drivers, want to remove the NVIDIA drivers, and reboot again. And I'm like, and I'm plugged directly because at the same time when I did that, I plugged directly the into the IGPU in the display port of the motherboard. And then I was like, okay, I install ATI up to date drivers, reboot again, and like decide to game. And I'm like, I expect terrible graphic, and my graphic card is still there, right? And then I see the pop up like Windows automatically reinstall. Oh, I see that you have a 3070. Let me reinstall NVIDIA Control Panel for you. I was like, no, that's not what I want here. And then I remember eventually after a while, well, I could just turn off in Device Manager the drivers, not the driver, but just the device, the 3070. But it's only work until reboot. So it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. Now I could have just unplugged the GPU, the power to the GPU, but with all the problem I had with the PCI Express slot, I was like, oh, we're so not doing that. So I tried a couple of times different like software solution in Windows, and in the end, it's like let's try. At the beginning, I didn't realize it, and it was interesting because I always start with Divinity Original Sin 2 because we play for 5 years, maybe once a week. to finish. We finally finished the story at the 5 year mark like a couple of weeks ago. But I know that game so well, and it's not a super heavy engine, but it just, and I'm like looking at the Viva tuning performance with the monitoring, and I'm like, that iGPU is really doing 300 FPS or 360 is like, I think the average is 345, which is what I was basically having with my 3070. I was like, no, that don't make sense. And then I put 80s. Yeah, it's not heavy, but it does the same thing. And then I was like, and I look and control NVIDIA control panel is back. And this is where I realized that like it makes sense and it's kind of idiot proofing for the user. It's like, yeah, you did plug in the iGPU, but contrarily to what we would do 10 years ago, it's like, but I see that you have a way better graphic card. So the rendering and the displaying for the computer being two different things, it's like, oh, I'm gonna render anyways all the frame with your graphic card, but I'm gonna display it on the port that you are. And it's kind of useful because it's like if the user doesn't know what to plug a computer, which, nothing wrong with that if you don't do it often with the tower. But if they end up plugging it in their motherboard port versus their GPU port, it seemed that at least on the BIOS and or in Windows level, they're like, yeah, I know what you did here, but there's a way better graphic card, so let's go use that for your rendering. So eventually I got fed up and I finally turned off the computer and removed the graphic card. Then because I even used the force option, and I was like, "What are you doing? I'm telling you, no, use this one. I'm forcing it, and you're still. Oh no, I still want." And every time the NVIDIA control panel, yeah, I could have removed the internet connection, but at this point, I was like, "Now I'm annoyed, and I want to find a software solution just to see." But and it was amusing because if I would go on my OLED monitor and put the Samsung one and put the setting, I would see instead of 165, it would be 120 hertz, freemium HDR and premium experience. So FreeSync premium experience and FreeSync HDR. So I was like, well, clearly you using the ATI because I know the other one is NVIDIA card, but all the rendering for like the game was still done by NVIDIA anyways. So I remove it, did all my benchmark, and now I'm gonna re-put it back. But this is where it became like, oh, it's I wanted to publish the video this week, so I was like, I'm gonna retest that because that's like it was late at night, and I was like, I think there's like a better way to do those things. But no, in the end, it was like, no, just remove the freaking graphic card because clearly it's not doing like before on older graphic card or older motherboard. It would use the GPU that you basically plug in. So if you were plugged on the onboard graphic, which get me wrong, they sucked, and you would know quite fast because you would be like, why is I'm only getting 10 frames a second in my game? And then you look, it's like, oh, I plugged the wrong one. And you switch it, and
Okay, let's look at some quick benchmark. Destiny looking great at 13 frames, between 13 and 14 frames second. I still don't know how I survived that fight, but like the lag was just like terrible. Then I switched to Divinity Original Sin like normally, and it was around 22 frames second. Not great at 1080p medium, but still playable, but not enjoyable. Then I switched to Forza Horizon 5 at 1080p medium or low, and you were getting 174 for the 3070. You dropped to 120, which is basically the frame rate. For the 6400, 9 for the W2100, but then you got to 31. It was playable, ugly, but playable and okay if you're used to old racing game at 30 frames second. 80s was around 76, 77. So it was steadily playable at 3440 by 1440, double the frame rate of the W2100. We then used Still Nomad and 3D Mark. the mobile version, of course, and you could see that like it's struggling quite a bit there to do the rendering. Only achieving 5 frames by second versus 26 for the 6400. Yeah, I just did the Vulkan test, so maybe I should have done the OpenGL one. That would have made more sense.
So it's a long intro to just like basically to say, but if you look at the performance level, I mean, yeah, I didn't have great expectation of between the two CU unit. Like my LGLI has 12, and the new generation are like 14 or 20, like and 24 for the AMD like H370. So basically, AMD is like, well, we're giving you onboard graphic because at this point, if you don't have a GPU or if your GPU die, it's kind of an annoying process. So you will have that, but it's mostly for display. And looking at the performance, playing like 80s at 75 frames a second is totally fine. But like other game, like with though Destiny was at like 9 or 10, Divinity was struggling around 15 or 20. So I'm sure if you're playing like a really older game, you could be, oh, I'm just gonna buy a computer with the APU and be fine. But like, it's not a real APU in the sense that yeah, it's onboard graphic, but it's onboard graphic for the purpose of display. So if you game on it, you're not gonna enjoy the experience. Now, in certain game, it would beat anyway the W2100, but and also it's a modern architecture and using the unified memories, but at least I like that you can set up the VRAM how much you want to use. Because on my Snapdragon X, because everything is automatic, it's like if you have a piece of software, let's say by a company that like force a subscription, and they didn't release at that time, they didn't release their like ARM client, and I was trying to load one of their application, and it would say, "Oh, you don't have enough VRAM," and the app wouldn't start. And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'm just gonna do go." It's a Dell 7450, so I was 7420. I don't remember for the number. It's 74 something. I was like, "Oh, I'll just go in the BIOS and just force it." But because now with the infant memory, everything is automatic, and the CPU should know more that you and like the BIOS, like it's you're like, okay, well, I cannot change any settings. So until they patch the application, they will, you won't be using that app. I'm sure there was better client and things like that, but the fact that at least on the AMD side, it's like, yeah, it's on board GPU and it's an APU, but will get you the option like same thing on the ROGLI. If I know I'm just gonna play light game, and especially with the version 1 of the ROGLI, you have only 60 gig of RAM, so you're like, well, I'll give you 1 or 2 gig and I'll play like that. But if you're on Cyberpunk, you're like, maybe I'll put it to 5 or 6 and be like, I'll keep a 12 gig for the OS and the game. This is why when they did their Ally X, we're like, well, the 24 is nice because it's like I'm gonna put 8 gig of VRAM and I'm gonna keep a 16 for the OS. But in the end, it's like the graphics, the result is what I would be expecting anyways. It's like, yeah, it's not great, but it for some game like light 2D game, it would work way better than I expected. Thanks for watching.